Optimizing pursuit expense is about preserving and replenishing the complex neurotransmitters involved in learning new information. These complex neurotransmitters are the currency of learning, and increasing their availability will decrease fatigue and prevent your subconscious mind from wondering if those resources could be better spent pursuing other goals. In psychology, these complex neurotransmitters are called willpower. Willpower is discussed by a lot of people with varying degrees of expertise in the subject, and as a result, there are a lot of misconceptions about what it is and how it works. One common misconception about willpower is that people who think of willpower as an unlimited resource have more of it than people who think of willpower as limited. This misconception comes from studies where these two groups of people were compared on the amount of time they chose to spend on voluntary working memory tasks. People who see willpower as unlimited chose to spend more time on those tasks than people who see willpower as limited, and some assumed that they spent more time on those tasks because they had more willpower. However, follow-up studies repeated these conditions and had these two groups engage in an ego-depleting task after engaging in voluntary working memory tasks. Ego-depleting tasks are designed to measure willpower by draining willpower at a constant rate until they are no longer able to engage in the task. These studies found that the more time someone spent on the voluntary working memory task, the less time they were able to spend on the ego-depleting task before running out of willpower. This means that the people who see willpower as unlimited didn't spend more time on these tasks because they had more willpower. They spent more time on these tasks because they weren't concerned about conserving their willpower. In other words, they ignored their fatigue. The second big misconception about willpower is that it's like a muscle that grows with use. This misconception comes from various studies that found that some people last longer on ego-depleting tasks than others. They assumed that these people lasted longer than the others because they had stronger willpower muscles. But these studies didn't take into account just how slowly willpower resources take to replenish. Follow-up studies showed that the people that lasted longer on these tasks had spent less willpower on other tasks before arriving at the test site compared to those who didn't last as long. So they didn't have more willpower, they just saved it up for the test. Optimizing pursuit expense isn't about getting more willpower. It's about learning how to better conserve the willpower you have and how to better replenish the willpower you spend. There are three major types of willpower expense. The first type of willpower expense is emotional regulation. The second type of expense is critical thinking. And the final type of expense is decision making. Emotional regulation is the most well-known type of willpower expense, and it happens anytime your emotions want you to do one thing, but you choose to do another. You regulate your emotions anytime you stay calm when you're angry, or get out of bed when you're tired, or just do anything that you really don't like doing. You lower emotional regulation costs by aligning your emotions with your attention. This is why learning to love your education is more effective than learning how to force yourself to engage in an education that makes you miserable. By adopting mastery approach goals, you have already aligned your emotions with your attention when it comes to learning. Decreasing emotional regulation expense in other aspects of your life will require different things for different circumstances. The only advice that can be given to everyone is to pick your battles and to go easy on yourself. Don't force yourself to do things you don't have to do, and avoid being your own drill sergeant. The second type of expense is critical thinking and occurs whenever you use working memory resources. Optimizing the pursuit efficiency of your learning goals also lowers the amount of willpower you use while processing novel informational elements. Novel informational elements are also processed while applying encoded information to solving new and complex problems. For example, someone who learned how to play chess doesn't have to use working memory resources to remember what the rules are or what the pieces do, but they do have to use working memory resources to read the state of the board, anticipate threats, and develop strategies for winning the game. So it would be a bad idea to schedule a study session right after your chess tournament. The last type of willpower expense is decision making, which can be lowered with implementation intentions and habit formation. Implementation intentions are decisions that you make ahead of time, and they involve specifying a time, place, and duration for engaging in a specific behavior. When the specified situation occurs, it will automatically cue the behavior, but it can only work if all three components are specified. Failing to specify a duration for the behavior will result in constant deliberation about when you should stop. Without a specified location, the behavior cannot be automatically cued. Implementation intentions lower the decision-making expense of willpower by lowering the number of decisions that you have to make. But the most effective way to lower the willpower expense of decision-making is to habituate the decision-making process. Habit formation lowers willpower expense by optimizing components of your behaviors and decisions until the entire behavior becomes fully automated. Habits do not form by repeating a behavior over and over again. Instead, they form when a particular cue is consistently responded to in a particular way. When you repeatedly decide to do the same behavior in response to the same cue, your subconscious picks up on the pattern and automatically makes the decisions for you when the cue is present. These could be environmental cues, physical cues, or behavioral cues. Habituating a behavior to an environmental cue means only doing that behavior when you are in that environment. For example, if you choose to study every time you enter the library, then entering the library would become a strong environmental cue to study. However, if you spend half of your time in the library studying and the other half browsing Facebook, then the library won't cue either behavior. Physical cues are bodily sensations. Most of these sensations are internal sensations that cue behaviors like finding a bathroom or grabbing a bite to eat. However, some of these cues are external, such as the clothing we wear. You can habituate certain behaviors to certain articles of clothing. For example, if you're usually relaxing while you're wearing pajamas, then wearing pajamas will become a weak physical cue for relaxing. And if you're usually working while you are wearing jeans, then wearing jeans will become a weak physical cue for working. The reason these cues are weak is because the behaviors are a usual response instead of a guaranteed response, and the behaviors are types of behavior instead of specific behaviors. The more concrete the associations and the more specific the behaviors, the stronger the habit becomes. Weak cues partially lower the cost of decision-making by narrowing down the options rather than making the decision for you. The last type of cue is behavioral. Repeatedly following up one behavior with another will form a behavioral chain where doing one will automatically cue the next. For example, someone who has a habit of making coffee in the morning usually responds to the behavior of getting out of bed by walking to the kitchen. Walking to the kitchen then cues opening the cabinet, which cues grabbing the coffee, which cues walking to the coffee machine, which cues opening the lid, which cues scooping out the grounds, and so on. If any one of those steps are disrupted, then the other behaviors are not cued. For example, the same person gets out of bed, which cues walking to the kitchen, which cues opening the cabinet, only for them to see that they ran out of coffee. When they're unable to grab the coffee, they don't feel the compulsion to continue on with the other steps as if they had the coffee grounds. Environmental and physical cues don't habituate the entire behavior, they only habituate the first step. The library cues you to get out your readings, which cues you to start reading, which cues you to take notes, and so on. Sitting at my desk cues me to start studying, which cues me to keep studying, until the feelings of fatigue cue me to stop. We don't habituate behavior, we habituate behavior initiation. In order to habituate studying to an environmental cue, it'll be best to get a clean slate. Making a decision that isn't habituated at all takes willpower, but making a decision that conflicts with another decision that is already habituated takes so much more. If you only scroll through Facebook while you're in the library, then choosing the library to study will cost an unsustainable amount of willpower. If you only eat in your dining room, then choosing to use the table to study will cost an unsustainable amount of willpower. Consciously reflecting on your behaviors will help you to figure out what habits you already have and what cues them. Once you find a clean slate, Use that environment as the specified location for your implementation intentions and refuse to use that environment for anything other than studying. In order to habituate studying to a physical cue, it's recommended that you use an accessory that you can carry around without wearing. For example, you can carry a ring around in your pocket that you only put on once you're going to start studying, and take it off as soon as you're finished studying. The ring will quickly become a physical cue to study. I personally have my study necklace that I only wear while I'm studying, or this, and wearing this necklace makes a strong physical cue to study. If I started wearing the necklace while I was watching TV, then the cue would weaken and the behavior would become less automated. Using physical cues in combination with environmental cues will have additive effects. Wearing your study ring in your study room will further automate the
Using a
decision to
behavioral
study.
cue to habituate studying means identifying a behavioral chain you already have and adding links that lead to studying. For example, if someone has a behavioral chain of making coffee in the morning, then they can choose to study where that behavioral chain ends. If it ends when they drink the coffee they make, then drinking coffee can become the behavioral cue to pull out the study materials, and so on. The important thing is to avoid adding links in the middle of a behavioral chain. If the same person usually watches TV after drinking their coffee, then drinking coffee is the behavioral cue for entering the living room, which cues turning the TV on, and so on.
The second way to build behavioral cues is to build behavior chains slowly. Any new behavior takes willpower, even if it's something you genuinely want to do. And new behaviors that require a large amount of willpower are tough to do consistently enough for them to become a habit. Thankfully, behaviors can be broken down into many small steps and tackled individually. For example, the behavior of studying is preceded by several smaller steps, such as collecting your materials, traveling to your study environment, and setting up your study space. If the entire behavior is too taxing
collecting the
to do
materials
consistently as a first step,
you can pack everything you need to study at a certain time of day every day, then set that backpack down and go do something else. Once collecting your materials at that time of day becomes a habit, you can respond to that behavioral cue by traveling to your study environment. You can pack your materials at a certain time of day and drive to your local library every day before turning around and heading straight back home. Once driving to your library becomes a habit, you can respond to that behavioral cue by entering the library and setting up your study space before immediately packing it up, ignoring the weird looks you'll get, and heading home. Finally, once all the preparation steps have been habituated, you can respond to the behavioral cue of setting up your study space with the behavior of studying. Habituating the behavioral chain of studying is easier when it's done one link at a time. Finally, you optimize willpower replenishment by getting deep, restful sleep. A lesser-known component of optimizing sleep is that sleep is a response to the environmental cue of your bedroom and the physical cue of your bed. Habituating sleep means only using your bed for sleeping. This habit can be reinforced if you only use your bedroom for sleeping. Most sleeping advice is readily accessible on the internet. There are also psychologists who specialize in helping people sleep, and they'd all be happy to give you personalized guidance. In summary, you optimize pursuit expense by conserving and replenishing willpower. You conserve your willpower by limiting the amount you spend on emotional regulation, critical thinking, and decision-making. You limit emotional regulation by picking your battles and going easy on yourself. You limit critical thinking expense by optimizing pursuit efficiency and avoiding working memory intensive tasks before studying. You limit decision-making by using implementation intentions and habit formation, and you replenish your willpower by sleeping. Guys, what a genius. So smart. So smart. You did it.